I was 24 years old when I realized that being the reliable child is just another way of saying you're the one they feel comfortable ignoring. My parents didn't hate me. Hate takes effort. They just looked through me like I was a piece of sturdy furniture that didn't need polishing. If my younger sister, Chloe, so much as scraped a knee, the world stopped turning. If she wanted a new car for her graduation, my father would spend weeks researching the safest models and my mother would pick out the interior leather. But me? I was the one who worked the double shifts at the logistics hub. I was the one who didn't ask for help with tuition. I was the one who stayed quiet because I thought that's what a man did. I thought being dependable was a badge of honor, but in that house it was just an excuse for them to look the other way. If you've ever been taken for granted, say something below and subscribe for what comes next. The day everything changed started like any other Tuesday. It was raining. One of those cold, gray drizzles that makes the concrete floor of a warehouse feel like ice. I was working the loading docks, moving heavy crates of industrial hardware. I told my supervisor 3 times that the hydraulic lift on the secondary platform was stuttering. It was making this high-pitched, grinding sound every time it reached its peak height. He just waved me off, telling me we had a quota to hit before the morning break. That's the thing about being the reliable guy. People assume you can just make it work. So I did. I kept loading. I kept moving. I was guiding a 400-pound crate of steel fittings when the lift gave out. There wasn't a loud bang like you'd see in a movie. It was just a soft, sickening thud as the pressure seal popped. The platform tilted 3 inches to the left. It was only 3 inches, but that was enough. The crate shifted. I tried to step back, but my boot caught on a metal grate. The corner of the crate caught me right on the side of the knee. I didn't feel pain at first. I just felt a weird coldness, followed by the sensation of my leg turning into something that didn't belong to my body. I looked down and saw my leg bent at an angle that made my stomach flip. I sat there on the wet concrete, watching the rain drip off the edge of the roof, wondering why I couldn't feel my toes. The hospital was a blur of fluorescent lights and the smell of antiseptic. The doctor, a man who looked like he hadn't slept since the 90s, told me I'd shredded my ACL and MCL, and there was significant meniscus damage. He told me that because of the way the bone had shifted, I needed surgery within 10 days. If I waited for the workers' comp paperwork to clear, which usually took months of litigation and back and forth, the scar tissue would harden and I'd walk with a limp for the rest of my life. I'd never work the docks again. I'd never even be able to go for a run. The cost for the private surgery was $5,000 out of pocket. To some people, that's nothing. To me, it was everything. I had some savings, but not enough. I went to my parents' house 2 days later, limping on a pair of metal crutches. They were sitting in their living room, which was filled with expensive-looking teak furniture and art they'd bought on their last trip to the coast. My father was looking at a brochure for a new boat. My mother was scrolling through her phone, probably looking at more decor. I sat down, my leg throbbing, and I told them everything. I told them what the doctor said about the 10-day window. I told them I needed $5,000 to save my leg. I promised I would pay every cent back with interest. I just needed the chance to get back on my feet. Literally. My father didn't even look up from his brochure. He sighed, that long, disappointed sigh he usually reserved for when the lawn service missed a spot. He told me that $5,000 was a lot of money to just give away. He talked about financial responsibility and how handouts don't help people grow. My mother nodded, saying they just put a heavy deposit down on a summer rental and things were tight. It was a lie. I knew they had the money. I'd seen the bank statements they left on the counter. They just didn't see me as a good investment. They told me I should learn to navigate the insurance system better. They told me this was a learning moment for my career. They were calm. They were rational. And they were leaving me to rot. When I left their house, the silence in my car was heavier than the cast on my leg. I felt a strange kind of clarity. The kind you get when you finally stop trying to make someone love you and just see them for who they really are. I drove to my brother's apartment. Mark was the failure of the family, at least according to my parents. He'd dropped out of college to start a small landscaping business that was constantly on the verge of folding. He lived in a place where the heater rattled and the windows leaked air, but he always had a beer and a seat for me. I didn't even have to ask. I just told him what happened at Mom and Dad's. Mark didn't say anything for a long time. He just looked at my leg, then looked at his own hands, calloused and stained with grass and oil. He got up, went into his bedroom, and came back with a heavy metal box. Inside was $4,000 in crumpled 20s and 50s. It was his entire emergency fund. It was the money he was supposed to use to buy a new commercial mower so his business could actually grow. He handed it to me, all of it. He told me that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when the lights go out. I told him I couldn't take it, but he wouldn't hear it. He told me that if I didn't take it, he'd throw it off the balcony. So I took it. I went to a predatory lender for the last $1,000, knowing the interest rate would eat me alive, but I got the surgery. Recovery was the hardest thing I've ever done. Physical therapy is a special kind of torture. It's the process of teaching your brain that the pain in your knee isn't a warning to stop, but a sign that you're breaking through. While I was sitting at home, unable to work, I started looking into things. I had a lot of time on my hands and a laptop. I'd always been good with numbers, the reliable kid. Remember? I started looking into my father's business dealings. He always acted like a titan of industry, but the more I dug into public records and tax filings, the more I saw the cracks. My father's wealth was a house of cards. He wasn't rich, he was just very good at moving debt around. He had leveraged their home, their cars, and even his small consulting firm against a series of high-risk private loans. He was playing a game of musical chairs with the bank, and the music was starting to slow down. He'd even used some of my old accounts, ones he'd set up when I was a kid, as collateral for some of his more questionable moves. That was his mistake. By linking his debt to my name, even tangentially, he gave me a seat at the table. I spent my recovery learning the language of finance. I didn't want to just survive. I wanted to understand the system that allowed people like my parents to look down on people like Mark. I realized that my father had defaulted on a private bridge loan 3 months ago. The lender was looking to sell the debt to a third party just to get it off their books. They didn't want to deal with the hassle of foreclosing on a stubborn old man in a nice neighborhood. They wanted cash, and they wanted it now. I called the lender. I didn't tell them I was his son. I spoke to them as a representative of a small LLC I'd formed using the last of my settlement money from the warehouse accident. The warehouse had eventually settled out of court to avoid a massive lawsuit over the faulty lift. It wasn't millions, but it was enough. I bought my father's debt for 40 cents on the dollar. I didn't do it because I wanted his money. I did it because I wanted the one thing he always held over me: control. By the time I was walking without a limp, I owned the mortgage on my parents' house and the liens on my father's business equipment. They didn't know, of course. To them, I was still the disappointing son who had survived a little leg injury and was now probably working some dead-end office job. They didn't ask how I paid for the surgery. They didn't ask about Mark. They were too busy trying to maintain the illusion of their perfect life. One afternoon, my mother called. She sounded stressed, which was rare. She told me that there had been some paperwork confusion with the bank and that a new management company was asking for a meeting. She wanted me to come over and help explain things, because I was always the one who was good with technical documents. She didn't say, "I'm sorry for leaving you to potentially lose your leg." She just asked for a favor, like she always did, assuming I'd be the reliable one who would fix it for her. I showed up at their house on a Friday. I wasn't wearing my work boots or my high-vis vest. I was wearing a clean suit and carrying a leather briefcase. I walked up the driveway, noticing for the first time how much the paint was peeling on the trim of the house they were so proud of. Inside, my father was pacing. He looked older. The bravado was gone, replaced by the frantic energy of a man who knows he's been caught. I sat down at the teak table. I pulled out the contracts. I explained to them very calmly that the bank hadn't made a mistake. I explained that their debt had been sold. I showed them the clauses they had signed, the ones that allowed the new owner to take possession of the property if payments weren't met within a 30-day grace period. My father started to bluster. He started talking about how he'd sue, how this was illegal, how he knew people in high places. I just waited. I let him talk until he ran out of air. Then, I turned the page of the contract and pointed to the signature on the bottom of the purchase agreement. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I've ever heard. My mother's hand went to her throat. My father just stared at my name on the document. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't call them names. I just told them that I was the one who had bought their lifestyle. I told them that every month they spent in that house, they were living on my mercy. I told them that the financial responsibility they wanted me to learn had been learned very well. I gave them a choice. I wasn't going to throw them on the street. I'm not them. But I told them the house was being sold. The proceeds would go toward paying off the debts they owed, including a very large check to my brother, Mark, to cover the money he gave me and then some. Whatever was left would go into a modest trust they could use to rent a small apartment. They were no longer the masters of their own lives. They were my tenants, in a sense. The look on my father's face wasn't anger. It was a complete, crushing realization that the child he thought he could ignore was now the only thing standing between him and total ruin. They tried to argue at first. My mother cried, saying they were my parents and that family doesn't do this. I reminded her of the day I sat in that exact same room, begging for $5,000 so I wouldn't be disabled for life. I reminded her of how they told me it was a learning moment. I told her that this was her learning moment. I told her that the cost of their vanity was the house, the boat, and the art. If they wanted to keep their pride, they could go find a way to pay off the $500,000 in debt they'd racked up. They signed the papers. They didn't have a choice. I watched them pack their things over the next month. It was a strange feeling, watching the people who seemed like giants my whole life shrink down to human size. They weren't villains in a storybook. They were just small, selfish people who thought they could use loyalty as a one-way street. I didn't feel joy watching them leave. I just felt finished, like a debt had been settled that had nothing to do with money. I took the money from the sale of the house and I went to see Mark. He was at his shop working on a broken engine. I handed him a check. It wasn't just the $4,000 he'd given me. It was $50,000. He looked at the number and then looked at me, his eyes wide. I told him it was an investment. I told him we were going to buy him the best equipment on the market and move his shop to a better location. He tried to refuse, but I told him what he told me. Family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up. And he was the only one who showed up. Today, my leg is fine. I can run 5 miles without thinking about it. Every time I lace up my shoes, I remember the cold concrete of that warehouse floor. I remember the silence of my parents' living room. And I remember the weight of the metal box Mark handed me. I don't talk to my parents much anymore. They live in a small 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. I pay the rent not because I have to, but because I choose to. It's a reminder to them every single month of who holds the power. They hate it, but they take the money, because in the end, they were never as strong as they pretended to be. Looking back, the accident was the best thing that ever happened to me. It broke my leg, but it fixed my vision. It showed me that the people you think are your safety net are often just the ones watching you fall to see how you land. If you're watching this and you're the reliable one, the one everyone turns to but no one helps, know that your strength isn't a weakness. Your ability to endure, to work through the pain, and to keep your head down is a superpower. But don't let them mistake your silence for lack of awareness. The people who underestimate you are giving you a gift. They are giving you the space to build something they won't see coming until it's already done. You don't need to scream to be heard. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. You just need to be patient. You need to wait for the right moment to turn the page. I learned that justice isn't about being mean. It's about being precise. It's about making sure that everyone finally gets exactly what they earned. My life is different now. I don't work the docks anymore. I run a small investment firm that focuses on helping independent contractors and small businesses stay afloat during hard times. Mark's business is thriving. We have dinner every Sunday. We don't talk about our parents much. We talk about the future. We talk about what it means to actually be there for someone. It took a broken knee and $5,000 to teach me that, but I'd pay it 10 times over to be where I am today. I'm curious. Have you ever been in a situation where the people who were supposed to have your back just walked away? Did you find a way to stand up on your own? Or are you still waiting for your moment? Let me know in the comments if you think I went too far with my parents, or if I gave them exactly what they deserved. Subscribe for more stories about people finding their own way and getting the justice they deserve.